but it's not turning. Oh, there it is.
Did that stress you out, Kate?
Just a little.
Okay.
Wow, there's a lot of people who show up for this.
Yes. And we're live. It is Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021, 5:02 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:02 p.m. Mountain Time in Santa Fe. And Ben, you have the monologue, the surprise monologue.
I do?
Yeah, you should tell us about the harrowing decisions that you had to make today.
Which ones were those?
Around certain beasts.
Oh, yes, it came to be mid-afternoon, and I'm afraid I did not have a beast of the day. And that was an upsetting experience for me, because usually over the course of the first few hours of the day, the beast of the day simply presents itself, and I tweet the beast of the day, and I feel like my debt to the Twitter community is satisfied. But today, the beast of the day did not present him or herself. And so I put the question to the internet community. I asked for nominations for the beast of the day. And I have to say, I got an extraordinary list of options for the beast of the day. Many people, of course, ignored the fact that the beast of the day is never a domestic dog or cat. I love dogs. I like cats.
Legs is very confused. Legs, do you want to ask a question? No, Curtis.
But they're just against the rules, so I couldn't tweet any of the proposed beasts. However, a number of other people played by the rules and suggested a slew of beasts who are going to populate the beast of the day for a week to come. Thanks to everybody who submitted axolotls and baby crocodile hatchlings, which are today's beast of the day in Cambodia. So if you have a beast of the day that you have been hankering to get on the feed, just stick it on that thread, and I'm going to be drawing on this for a long time to come. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Allegra Love back, who, was on the show once before, and things haven't been getting better along the border where she works as an immigration attorney. And so, welcome back to the show. I wish it were under better circumstances.
Hello.
Hi, Lex.
Hi.
The beast of the day, just FYI, is a charming thing that every day Ben tweets a picture of a beast that someone nominates to be beast of the day, and it can't be a dog or a cat, and that's the only rule, pretty much. And
every day.
Well, it's just a tweet, Legs. It's just like
this whole thing happens every day.
This show?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Well, this thing happens 5 days a week, but the beast
There's literally nothing that I can do every day. Nothing. Sometimes I forget to
immigration detainees.
Yeah, that's true. But there's really I sometimes even forget to eat some days, so I can't believe you do this every single day.
The more amazing thing is that there are people who show up in the audience every single day. For us, there's vanity involved in this. We get to talk to each other and hang out. But there are people who actually show up to watch this, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Anyways, Legs, it's great to have you back. I am so glad that last night, John exclaimed from his chair, approximately 6 feet from me, and I was in the bed, that because our apartment is a tiny, tiny, tiny matchbox, said, "Yes, it's here." And I said, "What?" I said, "Allegra's newsletter. I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting to hear what she has to say about the Haitian refugees." So
that's the way people react to the beast of the day. By the
yes,
way. Yes, the beast of the day is here.
Yeah. So anyways, tell us about why you wrote a newsletter and why John was waiting for it and what you said.
Okay. like you mentioned, I write a newsletter. So just to give like those who I don't know, which is probably everyone besides Ben and Kate on this, I don't know, what do you even call it? Like,
I don't know. There's not like a good
website.
It's like a webinar, like I don't know.
We call it a salon.
Okay, in this salon, my name's Allegra Love. Kate calls me Legs because that's my nickname, and you're welcome to call me that too. The only reason I changed it to Allegra late in life was because like my last name's Love, and I became a lawyer, and being like, please the court, like Legs Love for the respondent sounded too much like stripper. So no shade on strippers, just like I'm not one, and so I changed it to Allegra, but you're welcome to call me Legs too. I've been an immigration lawyer for quite some time, about 10 years, and I ran until recently a nonprofit here in like the whole state of New Mexico and West Texas to bring free immigration services to, immigrants and refugees. And that was like one aspect of my career, administering a nonprofit. But like my real passion and excitement for like professional stuff and my job is working on the border with asylum seekers and like really trying to figure out a couple things, like how to make that whole process and that whole environment safer and more humane. And then also just basically how to abolish the practice of immigration detention of anyone in the United States. It's a horribly failed industry policy. There's nothing, it provides nothing to us but an enormous waste of our tax dollars and an enormous amount of human suffering. So that's what I do for a living. I got this big fellowship where I'm allowed to do whatever I want. And so I'm working like as a mercenary on a lot of different projects right now. Anyway, so when
how does one get such a fellowship? I would like a fellowship where I get to
a foundation calls you and says, we are giving you this fellowship. I mean, this foundation rules. And they were like, as you're leaving your position as the ED of a nonprofit, like we want to invest a little bit in your brain and your courage and give you some time to rest. And we're just going to fund you for a while so you can make whatever choices you want in terms of reading, writing, working on projects, learning things, like stuff like that.
Awesome. So
yeah,
great.
no, it's totally wonderful. It's a foundation called the Lannan Foundation. They're based here in Santa Fe, but they actually support all kinds of activists nationally who work on issues of abolition and social justice the way that I do. I call it my anti-capitalist scholarship. And I am, and like, I recognize like that this is something that nobody gets and that I deserve it, but so do about 100 million other people working in this world right now. And so I feel incredibly grateful. Anyway, yeah, so when your project is wondering and thinking and working and striving and plotting to make the border a safer place for people to be, when an event like what's going on in Del Rio, Texas right now happens, it obviously is like really horrible. And part of what this newsletter was talking about yesterday is just like what frustrates me during these moments, and it's been happening in cycles over the course of my career, is let's say like a photo emerges or a meme emerges or, like the like kids in cages or a picture of like a person being whipped by horseback by a Border Patrol agent. And like we all collectively
say, oh no,
we're
not going to allow this. This is too much.
Yeah, no, and it's horrible. And then all of a sudden there's like this frenzy of desire for understanding and there's all this coverage. And you start to like you just want to say to the world, like, okay, everyone take a deep breath and like sit for an hour and let's talk about some fundamentals of what is going on here. Because in those chaotic moments, the government, like my position here when I'm looking at what the government's lying to people about what they can and cannot do in these spaces and what is legal and what is illegal to justify like what we're seeing happen in plain sight. And I wrote a newsletter to try and say, like, here's some things you really, really need to understand about this situation so that you can do your own analysis of what you read in the media and what the government is saying, because they're not telling the truth about this situation, or more like it's disinformation and like misinformation.
So what are those things? What are the basics that you need to know in order to process the news about this situation?
So before she gets to that, I'm going to read kind of the quick facts that you gave in the newsletter. Legs,
yeah, that's fine.
About the situation, and then you can go to like the 5 points that you lay out.
I have a sixth one because I've been doing more reading and being like, what the fuck? There's a sixth one. Okay. That I need to address.
So for those that are not familiar about what Legs is kind of talking about right now and what's going on, is that there are, in the last few weeks, about 12 to 14,000 people, some individuals and some families, arrived at the U.S. border at Del Rio, Texas. A lot of those people, but not all, were Haitian, and there are Central and South American too. And where the Haitians are concerned, news sources are basically pointing out that a lot of them are not actually coming directly from Haiti, but are actually coming to Haiti from other points in South America, where they migrated after there were economic issues and the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. Was it 2010? I can't remember. And basically then left like Argentina and Chile because it was such a racist, they were being there was apparently so much racism there and they were being discriminated against. And so made their way across like a great swath of swampland and jungle that had no like roads through it, basically, up to the US border. There's no food or water, health services all the way there. Anyways, now that they've arrived at this border, there have been pictures of people trying to go across the Rio Grande, and the Border Patrol on horseback, whipping, appearing to whip. In fact, maybe they are just reins, but in a couple of the pictures, it looks like they're wearing a cowboy hat and they have their Border Patrol and they're on this horse, and there's this like poor like black, like Haitians, I'm assuming Haitian refugee, like reaching up and being kind of like the reins are whipping around. Someone put a link to that in like the chat if you could. I know that this has been going on, looking like it's like whipping this migrant, and kind of you can just kind of see all of the men on horseback and these people carrying all of their belongings and garbage bags and trying to ford this like chest high water. And so it is just like a very, very poignant image, and it went viral yesterday. And there has now been, as like Legs is talking about, like a huge amount of kind of, or not quite as much as the Trump like kind of babies in cages thing, but like a huge outpouring of concern. And Legs writes this newsletter, and so she identified these kind of things that you wanted to correct the record about, that were like the 5 biggest things that you wanted to correct the record about. So go ahead and take it from there.
Okay. So the first thing I want to correct the record about, because I've been hearing the government say it and it's in the media, is that this was a surprise. And that like all of a sudden, this is like a sudden crisis surge on the southern border that requires like an urgent, violent reaction that couldn't have possibly been prepared for. That is wrong. This is the result of like 2 to 200 years of failed policy on the U.S. government. Anyone I work with, any immigration advocate, any immigration reporter could have told you that something like this was going to happen. The government knew something like this was going to happen. It's all been forecasted. But because of their violent response and because of their inhumane response, they need the public to believe that this was an unbelievable surprise that they couldn't have possibly prepared for. They have been using deterrent strategies as the numbers of families and individuals seeking immigration has been going like this for the last 7 years or so, since 2014. They've been also ramping up their deterrent strategies, right? And it's not working. And the more vicious the deterrent strategies get, the more the more crisis-like the situations are when a mass group of people still want to come to the border, and the violent ways and the ways that we inflict suffering to try to make them not come, it starts to reach this point where we start to see what's happening on the border right now. We have known that this group of migrants has been heading for the border for months and months and months. And this was absolutely predictable. But the government needs you to think, so they can keep your vote and we don't call them criminals, that this was all a huge surprise. It wasn't. Okay, that's the first point. The second point is, and this is something that people need you to believe in our government, in all kinds of immigration enforcement. They need you to believe that the people who are camped out in Del Rio right now did something illegal. I mean, they 100% did not. U.S. asylum law is like really, really, really clear. There's only one way to ask for asylum, which is to come directly to the place you're asking for asylum, stick your 2 feet inside the territory, and ask for asylum. And these people aren't even trying to like infiltrate the country. They are literally like sitting their asses on the banks, the northern bank of the Rio Grande, and being like, I need to do this. Now, there's this rumor in immigration law that you're supposed to line up at the ports of entry. You can do that generally. That's one way to ask for asylum. But going between ports and waiting till you encounter an agent and asking for asylum there, that way is completely sanctioned by law. It is a completely legal way to do it, right? But the craziest thing about what's happening now is the ports of entry have been closed to asylum seekers since March of 2020 under this public health order called Title 42. And so there is no way for an asylum seeker to line up at a port of entry and ask for political asylum. The only way you could possibly do it is to do exactly what these people did, which is cross the desert between ports of entry, cross the Rio, and ask for it there. So this idea that that you'll see just like everywhere, that this is irregular, that this is illegal, that this is what happens to people when they break to law, that is just false. And the Biden administration's position is do not come. But you can't say, people have an international right to seek asylum. And just because you tell someone not to come because it's politically horrible and inconvenient for people to come at the moment is not a legal mandate. Just because Ali Mayorkas stands up and says, do not come, and Kamala Harris says, please do not come, that doesn't actually create any sort of legal framework.
Yeah, no, of course
it's a
not.
request, but it's not illegal. Okay, so that's the first point. The second point is that we don't have the resources to process this many people. Okay, so I need us all to remember what was probably an eternity in the news cycle, but was actually only several weeks ago when we had to endure pictures of seeing just people falling off of planes on runways in Kabul, or, babies and families just in desperation in airports in Afghanistan, and just being the outcry of the world that was just we have a moral duty to all these refugees to help. And saying to the Biden administration, you have to help evacuate people out. We had this big awakening to understanding that helping refugees is something that you have to do even when it's difficult and it's inconvenient. And you could Google, I literally Google moral obligation, and every major news outlet across the globe was just talking about how we had moral obligations to help refugees under our the promises we made under UN protocols after World War II, right? Well, that was all well and good, except and because of it and because of all that pressure, we settled something 60 to 90 Afghan refugees pretty peacefully and easily in the last couple of weeks in the United States, and are very, very sort of in like an orderly way, helping them like calmly and with their health and safety in mind get through the process and help figure out how to like resettle them. All of this is possible, especially when you're looking at like a much smaller number of people in Del Rio. Like it's like 14 or 15,000 people. In my newsletter, I added this fact, and this might get a little confusing, but I'm sure this crowd's really bright, so hang in here. We have all these corporate contracts with private detention facilities where we pay for beds no matter how many people are detained there. And detention numbers are really low now. We're paying for 20,000 unused beds right now in ICE detention facilities run by corporate prisons. And I'm not saying we should be sticking Haitians in those prisons, but if we're like, you know, spending like truly like millions of dollars a night paying for these correctional contractors to have empty beds, then like people saying like we can't possibly figure out how to like detain people peacefully in like healthy settings and like safe settings in Del Rio while we figure out how to process them, it's just bullshit. Like
yeah.
And yeah.
So okay, so just to sum up, so point one was the people haven't done anything illegal to when they've come to Del Rio in like trying to seek asylum. Two, and like they had no other way to do this really, or few other ways to do this because of the coronavirus and the closed ports. And two, that basically that we absolutely do have the resources to process like 14 to 15,000 refugees. If we just do. So what about what I'm hearing about like putting them on flights back to Haiti or sending them back to Haiti?
So that's like there's like a couple more myths I want to debunk. Like Haiti is not a safe place to send people. It's not. We actually designated Haiti as a TPS country in May, and then re-extended the TPS designation 5 weeks ago. Temporary protective status. It's a status that we actually don't use that often, where we say it's simply too dangerous to deport people to this country. And even for people who have absolutely no relief from removal in the United States, we're still not going to deport them because it's too dangerous. And in that designation 5 weeks ago, and I'm looking this up in the newsletter I wrote, the Department of Homeland Security said, Haiti's grappling with a deteriorating political crisis, violence, and a staggering increase in human rights abuses. And they stopped all deportations to Haiti until Sunday, when abruptly, when images started emerging of these camps, they were like, we're just going to start like hauling people to Haiti on deportation flights as fast as we possibly can. Why are they doing it as fast as they possibly can? Excellent question, Legs. And I'll tell you that answer. Because it's illegal. And last week, a federal judge said that the whole Title 42 structure was illegal, especially as it pertains to families, and that the Biden administration had to stop summarily expelling people en masse from the U.S. border who were seeking humanitarian protection. But they stayed the injunction for 2 weeks. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe to give the Biden administration a chance to appeal. But they have 2 weeks to keep doing this before they're enjoined from doing it, because a federal judge has said this is absolutely fucking illegal. And guess who else chimed in on that point this week? Yesterday, the UN High Commission of Refugees. Like, it is absolutely illegal to expel people who are seeking protection for their humanitarian reasons to countries under a public health order. It's called refoulement. And the whole point of asylum is the asylum systems and the refugee systems is to avoid refouling people to the countries where they might be killed without due process. And you absolutely cannot do it because of a pretextual public health order that our former president used and put in place to try and gain control of the border under the pretext of a health issue for a disease that he barely even acknowledged existed. Not a disease, a virus. So
I'm going to sum up the myths you have debunked for us so far. You have,
sorry, I'm talking so much.
Yeah, well, no, it's really great. It's also, I'm a huge fan of like, where did you get that fact? And like, you're a lawyer. And I mean, that's kind of, anyways, I love that you are like, guess who said this? A federal judge. Guess who said this? The UN Commissioner of Refugees. Like, this is very helpful. It's like, it's not just like, I love you, Legs. It's not just Legs having a fever dream, like about like where the state of the law is.
That was yesterday with Maggie.
I know that. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Anyways, but to run through this, they knew that they were coming. This is not a surprise. That was like your first kind of point. Then it's like they're not doing anything illegal. They are completely they are going through the exact procedures you need to go to get asylum in the United States and under international law and everything else. 3, that we do have the resources to process and take care of these people, and to like figure out how to what to do with them, at least for a period of time. And then basically like Haiti is not safe. We can't just send them back to Haiti, which is like not a very safe place for them to go at the moment. And that you can't legally expel them. And the reason that they're trying to do it so quickly is so they can get away with it in the 2 weeks that they have a stay on the injunction before they basically get called out under international law, or they already got called out by international law.
U.S.
But like, yeah. So,
all right. So point 4.
Yeah. What? So that was 6.
Actually, this is point 6, and this is the one that like is for me maybe like the biggest piece of learning I've had in my entire like 10-year career as a border lawyer. Deterrent strategies work. They want you to believe. That's not the truth. This is the lie. The lie is,
I was like, you have to like, I'm like, you have to like,
sorry,
you said that. And I was like, you said it so passionately that I was like, wait,
this is the lie. This is the lie. Deterrence works. The government, and basically like this has been going on, I mean, as long as I have been alive. So like 40 years, all the presidents like have been saying, if we create enough pain, torture, suffering, if we turn people back at sea, if we interdict them, if we take their children from them, if we force them to cross through a deadly furnace of a desert in the middle of the summer where you are literally walking over migrant bones, if you send them back to Mexico, if you put them on planes and make them cross through Mexico again, if you make them cross the Darien Gap, which is like the worst migration in the world, like that will stop people from coming. And it's this enormous underestimation of what causes migrants to move. And it's a deadly underestimation because you think by being cruel, you're going to stop someone who has no other choices. You are forcing them into extraordinarily dangerous situations, which is what we're seeing in Del Rio right now. Is they're like, let's close off every possible way for people to come to the United States and ask for help, but they're underestimating how horrible the situation is, and they're forcing human bodies to do like incredible migrations and put their like children and their own bodies through incredible things just to do the chance. I have tried. I've worked on migrant caravans. I've worked all across Mexico trying to convince migrants, do not come to the United States. They're going to try and hurt you. They're going to take your kids from you. They will have no respect for your body. Your body you could die in prison. And and people are like, what else do you want me to do? This is what I'm going to do. And so when our policies underestimate that human spirit and think we can break it, we end up doing like outrageously like unbelievable and inhumane things to their actual like physical bodies to try and do it. And so we need a new plan. Times are changing, right? Like we have seen that there's just like an unstoppable force of family migration coming up from the South over the last decade. We also know that climate change is coming. We also know that like when people can't drink clean water, when their houses underwater, when their communities are on fire, when they can't grow a crop, they're going to have to move. And short of executing them as they try and enter the country, there's like literally nothing else that you can do. I mean, Jacob, I just saw that Guantanamo Bay thing myself on my feed. It's outrageous. Anyway, sorry. I'm like looking at the feed too.
No, there's a lot.
I mean, that's my final point is like, we keep pushing these policies, and like the Biden administration has absolutely just taken up Trump's. It's like they're just carrying Trump's football towards this end zone when they said they weren't going to. But like that's what's going on. Like we're just like, this hasn't worked. It did not work under Clinton. It did not work under Obama. It did not work under Trump. And we're just like, let's keep trying this when we need an actually much more humane approach that might actually end up costing our country less and actually bringing in some refugee populations that can actually help parts of our country thrive. You know, like our economy needs workers. It's also dumb. And this like strategy of pain, it's not working, and we can do better. But we need to start like talking about these myths that we're choosing the pain strategy because of.
So I have a million questions here, but I'm going to start with this one. Why do you think the rhetoric about the Afghans is so different from the rhetoric about Haitians, about Guatemalans, about Salvadorans? On the one hand, you have a group of people that, you know, large numbers of people trip over themselves to say, hey, we owe it to them, to even people who didn't work for the U.S. military, right? Even people we didn't specifically incur a specific debt to, developed a reliance interest on U.S. policy and U.S. goodwill because the Taliban are super bad people and they kill women and girls and, you know, slavery and all that stuff. And so we say, hey, you know, there's a relationship between our policy and your plight. If we're going to pull out and withdraw protection, there's a certain amount we owe. And there are dissenters from that view, obviously, but it's a relatively broad political coalition that buys that. You apply the same logic in the Northern Triangle countries where, you know, this is a long historic relationship between U.S. policy and people, and all of a sudden this same sense of empathy goes away. And I'm curious why you think people react so differently to Afghans who want to come here as refugees than to Haitians or Northern Triangle citizens.
Well, I mean, this isn't my area of expertise, but like just as someone who had to watch the Afghan evacuation, it was horrible. It was embarrassing. It was like I was 20 when 9/11 happened, and I've been party to a 20-year war that's failed, and like, you know, thousands and thousands of lives lost and billions and trillions of American dollars spent, only to see it result in that is embarrassing and shameful and disgraceful. And I feel like the easiest way to soothe some of that bad feeling and that dissonance inside of me is to be like, holy shit, we got to help the refugees. I mean, and I was like, I did not participate in protesting the Afghanistan war after like the first year. And so so then all of a sudden this war that I'd been largely ignoring and this violence that I had let my like, it was in my face, and I was like, oh my God, but like, what can we do right now? Suddenly I'm re-engaged, and there's nothing I can do about the last 20 years. But what I can do is freak out about all the people who are trying to get evacuated, which is why we're doing it because it feels good to us, you know, to soothe that tension of having to witness like that failed war. That's what I think. I don't know. And I don't know that we're as connected with the history and the imperialism and the devastation that American actions have had in Central South America and the Caribbean. Like, it's all there. Like, I'm sure there's people who know a ton about it who are watching right now, but and like there's article after article, and I've studied a lot of it in the Northern Triangle because the majority of my clients come from the Northern Triangle. But I just don't think Americans are as connected right now than as we are to like the 20-year war we just fought, and just like the visceral devastation that's occurring because of it.
So you just kind of think that, like, sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Also racism, although I guess Afghans.
Yeah, like, no, that's an overdetermined variable.
Yeah, it is, because they're also brown.
Have a lot of hostility
towards Muslims.
Well, and specifically, you know,
brown ones.
To the extent that we distinguish, I think there's a lot of racist sentiment toward, you know, sort of Pashtun and Iranian or Dari speaking Afghan. I mean, people don't know this group of people, but to the extent that they are aware of this, there's a lot of prejudice associated with, with Muslims from this particular region. So I want to, like, I basically have a, I have a lot of time for the idea that we should admit a lot of refugees, and it just seems to me to be something that shouldn't be an especially controversial thing, and historically actually hasn't been until relatively recently. But I do think when you're talking about the southern border in particular, there's this question of, and I'm just going to state it bluntly and somewhat crudely, if we listen to people like you, we let in everybody who crosses the border. What's the limiting principle? And I think a lot of people get really hung up on that point. And so you say, to me, I think the answer to my earlier question is you can titrate the number of Afghans you admit because you have to fly them here. But you can't titrate the number of Northern Triangle people who can walk across Mexico or the length of Mexico. Like, Mexico can titrate that to the extent that it has the capability to. But ultimately, once you say you're going to adopt the same posture toward Northern Triangle migrants as you do to Afghan migrants, there's a floodgates issue. And I'm just sort of interested to your sense, if we put you in charge of immigration policy or in border policy, how quickly would we be overwhelmed with numbers that the politics of this country simply won't tolerate?
Well, I mean, so everyone asks me this all the time, like, okay, if you were in charge, what would you do? And I think, like, the really important, way to start talking about this is, the answer is, like, I don't really know, okay? Because, or, like, I don't know exactly how to address the floodgate issue, because it's kind of like when you talk about abolition and, like, in the criminal justice system, our framework is so tightly wound around these ideas of scarcity and these ideas of control of other people's bodies that we lack the imagination in any parts of our, like, discussion or vocabulary to think beyond it. And part of what I've always said in these situations is, like, I don't know, but we have to unwind so much of our, like, presumptions about this situation before we can bring all the smart people to the table to start talking about it, right? Like, and the number one thing to start that discussion is to say, like, these people are not criminals. There's no moral element to migration, that people move, and that is like a functionally, like, amoral thing, and that punishing them for that movement or controlling their body because of that movement is not an option. And like, that freaks people out, right? Because you're essentially saying open borders, and you're essentially bringing up exactly what you said, which is the whole floodgate argument, which is, like, the alpha and omega of all of our refugee policy is this idea that if we don't hurt people, everyone on planet Earth is going to want to come to the United States, and that's untenable. Well, first of all, not everyone wants to come to the United States. Like, home is a real concept. Like, I don't want to leave my home. I hate it here sometimes, but I also like, it's the first day of fall in New Mexico and I love it here so much. And like the thought that I could never see this again makes me like, it would break my heart. Like my life would be empty. I just don't like, home is a really, really important and powerful thing. So part of what we need to think about is how to help people stay in the places they are. This is often called like the root causes solution is like address making people's homes better so that they can stay there. That's maybe if you want to talk about the number one reason to take climate change seriously and act like it's the fucking imminent disaster that it is so that people can stay in their homes, right? People want to stay there. Yeah. And I mean, the second thing is like, why do we assume that a lot of people coming and being processed is a disaster necessarily? There's ways that we can structure border policy where people can come and go, that they can, like, where we can do job trainings. You know what would help if we gave people permission to work the moment they got here? This is such an
important point. If you just let people come and leave easily, if you made it easy to show up and leave, you'd be surprised how many people came seasonally.
Well, like one of the reasons there's 8 million or so undocumented Mexicans in the country right now isn't because Mexicans like being undocumented. It's because when in 1996, when IRA, that was the law that made the border like impossibly porous. Like it, all of a sudden people had to be like, I have to choose which side of the border I wanted to be on, when it used to be I could come and go and send money. And, you know, they signed NAFTA and the corn economy is collapsing in Mexico. And so like, I guess I'm going to choose to stay in the United States because that's where I can use money. That's where I can make money. And so like, we created the conditions with which we had to have undocumented immigrants in this country, and then immediately turned around and started criminalizing those same people who were like, I never wanted to do it this way. And now you're going to like throw them into jails and steal them from their families and force them into really, really horrendous situations.
I also want to say that I just wanted to say this really quickly, and I'm going to bring Jacob up on the screen to ask this question. He has a couple great ones. But I love this point, Ben and Legs. I'm so glad that we got here because I think it is this like one thing of like this horror story of like, where will it end? We'll just be flooded with Mexicans as if there's not like a finite population of them. And like as if the United States is running out of land. I don't know. Like, anyway, I just really do think that there is something fascinating about that. And I also think that, can we also have like a moment for the fact that what would scare us about that situation, besides the fact that it would help us because we are having a worker shortage, as Legs points out, and there's so many economies that could be like helped by this, is that we kind of think that we'd run out of, like, they would take advantage of social services and resources. And like
they pay into them.
But I was just going to say, but they pay into them. And so like, this is one of the most fundamental ridiculousnesses of some of these, of like work, of like this art. But come on, Legs, you hear that argument all the time.
I know.
And it's like apps. It's like my grandma saying that like she paid for her social security benefits herself by working when she was like a housewife. And I'm like, no, I pay for your social security benefits right now. Like, this is how it works. But like,
when you like realize that like fundamentally you can't really point to how it would economically devastate our country. I mean, look at the Mariel boat lift. Everyone thought that was going to devastate our country, and then it devastate the economy of Florida. It definitely did not. And so when you can't point to any like historical or actual economic reason why this would be devastating, then you're like, so why are we so upset? Because racism. Like, that's it. Racism is the beginning and the end of all these arguments, and we use the economic thing as just like a code word for just being like, we don't want people from south of our border coming and thriving in our country.
I don't think
I think there is more to it than racism.
I do too. I think it's more than just.
I don't want to Alice Jacob indefinitely. So let's get to his question first, and then I will.
Nice to see you again, Jacob.
I will challenge the racism premise.
Jacob, are you an immigration lawyer?
Yes, I am.
I can tell.
Just the whole office space.
No, like truly, the bleak office space, the sort of
the plant, like
tie here too.
Yeah. No, I could tell from your questions.
Okay, yeah, I have 2 to 3. Which one should I start? The Remain in Mexico, the PSG, or the
Remain in Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any thoughts on the federal judge ruling that Biden had to re-implement the Remain in Mexico program? The Supreme Court refused to enjoin it. And if I remember correctly, they had some crazy, wild deadline to re-implement it. So
this is my like actually official thought on that judicial ruling. It's yaya. Like it's total yaya. And I mean that because for those who don't know what the Remain in Mexico program was, it was an enforcement strategy where like an asylum seeker would approach the US border and they would ask for permission to seek asylum and they would be dumped back in Mexico and then they would get like a hearing date and then you'd approach the bridge on the day of your hearing. Like God knows what you're doing in Mexico, living in camps, living in the streets, getting kidnapped, getting extorted. And then like you're supposed to arrive at the port of entry. They put you in shackles and take you in a van to the nearest immigration court. You do your hearing, but it's not like the hearing. It's just like your first scheduling hearing. They put you back in shackles and dump you back in Mexico. But like this is why this was a Trump era program that Biden like almost immediately canceled. But here's what's crazy about the judge mandating the Biden administration to start that program up. It was always a discretionary program. They only actually subjected 75,000 asylum seeking migrants to the program over, to a 2-year period. So like the Trump administration was discretionarily deciding how and when they wanted to enforce this policy. And then the federal judge wheels around and says to the Biden administration, you have to do this. And like, how do you mandate an enforcement policy that not only like was discretionary when Trump was doing it, but also they completely stopped using during the pandemic because they closed the ports of entry? The decision made no sense. And even the Biden administration is like, what are we supposed to do here? Also, it requires the cooperation of Mexico. What if Mexico doesn't want to cooperate and take these migrants back? Would then the Biden administration be held in contempt because of Mexico's refusal to participate? You can't the Supreme Court can't tell Mexico what to do. I'm sorry.
No. This
if my answer doesn't make sense, it's because the order didn't make sense.
Was it this bonkers?
Yeah, it was absolutely bonkers.
Okay.
I had a Remain in Mexico case. So just absolutely, there's a thing called a master hearing, which is basically just the status hearing. Allegra mentioned it, but if I could go a little bit more in detail. A master hearings they bring everybody to just one hearing. In the before the pandemic, you'd get 40, 50 cases on the docket. Crazy amounts of people. And that's just a status hearing where the judge would go to everybody. Okay, what are you seeking in the United States? Okay, you want asylum? Okay, are you available for a trial date at this date? Okay, this is your trial date. They'd go home. Okay, a non-LPR cancellation, go home. This is your trial date. So the problem with the Remain in Mexico program is there's no home. They shackle them. They bring them to the master hearing. Oh, okay, so you're asking for asylum. Okay, you can go back to Mexico and wait 2 to 3 years for your next hearing date.
Wow, that's completely bonkers. Wow. Okay, that's crazy. What's your second question, Jacob? I know you have a couple, but one more.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. So second question it's just more of a technical question. I know we keep talking about asylum for these Haitian refugees. I'm just curious what the PSG would be or what a protected ground we're arguing, because PSG is
unpack those terms for viewers who don't know them.
So real quickly, in order to qualify for asylum in the United States, you have to have a credible future fear of persecution in your home country based on one of 5 protected grounds: politics, race, religion, national origin, or the most nebulous particular social group, which is just A particular social group is kind
A
of
particular social group is the PSG.
Yeah, PSG.
Yeah.
But it's
where
specific
all the litigation is happening right now.
Because it's poorly defined.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Got it.
And it needs to be defined with particularity, which is where you have issues with something like women in El Salvador, where judges have been kind of squeamish about particularity, and it has to there has to be nexus too. That's like a separate prong, is that your persecution has to be based on that protected ground and not just random persecution, which is where you have the issues with those gangland cases.
Okay, so first of all, I work in detention in West Texas and Southern New Mexico and Northern New Mexico, and there's 4 detention centers. I work in all of them, and they detained so many Haitians this year. So I talked to a lot of people about their potential asylum claims, and there's a lot going on in Haiti that could potentially put you into a PSG or a political group. But what's really important about your question is that, like, what you're pointing out is that asylum is a deeply complicated, deeply fact-based inquiry, right? And so if the U.S. government is saying, like, well, these people are not asylum seekers because we can't paint them with a broad brush of what, like, their PSG is or their, like, political thing that gets them asylum. And, like, you know, they're even saying in the news, like, they're like, CBP is sorting people by who has asylum claims and not. And you're like, asylum is just like, it's an enormously complicated analysis that requires like counsel, a judge, enormous amount of evidence, like reading through like tons of precedent decisions. It depends which circuit you get sent to, which court you're sent to. Like, it's an enormously complicated thing, which is why the government saying most of these people aren't asylum seekers, and we know that because, like, as we were like lashing them with fucking horse reins, they mentioned that they like needed a job, and that categorically like excludes them from asylum. So, like, guess what? Most asylum seekers also need jobs, and often they mention it when they are coming across the border, and then the U.S. government turns around and says they're not seeking asylum because they told me they came here to get a job. And you're like, it can be both. I once lost an asylum claim partially because my client mentioned to a Border Patrol agent as he was crossing that he was going to go live with his grandma in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And they were like, see, he's migrating to be with his family and not because he being shot at by gangs when he was organizing against them in his neighborhood. But like, you cannot, while you're rapidly trying to break up a camp and put people on deportation flights and deal with like an out of control Border Patrol office, also simultaneously decide that people do or do not qualify for asylum.
But isn't that, I think your point here is proving too much, because you're saying, hey, these are people who have enormously sympathetic situations. They may or may not fit within the terms of asylum law, but we should be sympathetic to and solicitous of their plight anyway. That's really an argument, as I hear it, for dealing with this problem outside of asylum law altogether.
Well, look, remember, we're talking specifically about one country when we talk about this, right? Like, at the moment, we are talking about Haiti. We are talking about a country that our nation designated far too dangerous to deport people to 5 weeks ago. So the analysis might be different if you're talking about Mexicans. It might be different if you're talking about Colombians. But at the moment, yes, we do need a mechanism to protect Haitians beyond asylum, because they're not all going to fit into asylum. Asylum is not the best tool. It was invented after the Holocaust as a way to sort of prevent what had happened when like the moral failure to protect people who needed protection from the state. Like, everyone was like, no, we don't want to do it. And there was no legal fail-safe to say you had to do it.
So
but
your basic view, to which I'm not wholly unsympathetic, is that any Haitian who asks to, given the current craziness in Haiti, both politically and with the earthquake that just happened, any Haitian who shows up at a U.S. port of entry, or for that matter on a shore in the Gulf Coast, we should give by one means or another, we should allow to emigrate here on at least a temporary basis.
Yeah, I think so. But also, like, there's a lot between that and just immediately putting them on planes and brutally just deporting them to a place where there's no plan for how to keep them safe. So, like, yes, I think, like, if those are the two options, then I'm choosing the one you just laid out. But yes. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Richard, final question. Nice to see you. Thank you for the dogs. Oh, you have to unmute yourself. Hold on. I got it. No, I don't. Oh, no. Can you do it? No.
I can't do anything.
I know.
I am disempowered here.
Okay.
Richard, just refresh your screen.
Type your question. Or
he typed it already. I'll ask it. I will. He asks, I don't understand what the Biden administration is thinking about the politics of their current border policies. By doubling down on the policies of the former guy, they're going to drive cynicism and apathy on the left, votes that they need. What am I missing?
It's a bad idea. You're not missing anything. And also, no matter what they do, Ted Cruz and like Abbott and Ron DeSantis and whoever else is going to say that they're just like opening the border to refugees. Literally, no matter what they do, the narrative from the right is going to be that they have open borders. So if you're going to catch that flack from the right, why not do the right thing? Why not try to experiment with what like a more humane response would be? Why not try and keep my vote? Right? Like, I'm so insulted by this government.
Because they know that you're not going to vote for the right, Allegra. Like, they know that you're never going to vote for the right. You're never going to lose. Well, you might not show up to vote.
I'm going to vote for Joe Biden if he doesn't improve this. Like, I regret my vote for him because of this situation.
But you
so, like, I'm not going to vote for a Democrat. And I know that, like, a lot of people won't agree with me, but, like, they have lost my vote. And I will, like, what's the difference between this? This is worse than Trump on the border right now. This is worse than, and I practiced for 4 years under the Trump administration. It's worse right now. And everyone told me you have to vote for this guy because everyone's life depends on it because we can't take another 4 years of Trump. And I'm getting years that are worse than Trump. So they have lost my vote.
Yeah.
And they need to hear that. They need to feel that. They need to feel that they are going to lose my vote. And I have to be sincere about that, or else they're like correctly calculating that they need to play into the fears of people who are in the center.
Well, I am, for one, if we are 1,000 or 2,000 days into in lieu of fun, or I've lost track of days and what they mean, but whenever, I'm looking forward to checking back and seeing where we stand on this and if anything changes, because this is like, I've just been thinking about you in our conversation last time, and I learned so much the last time we talked. And again, I have learned so much. I love your 6 myths. You should, if you don't use Twitter, because as I was mocking you in the green room.
But I don't really.
I know this. I know. And so
I have a Twitter account, but I don't post things.
But your newsletter is brilliant. But you should. We'll talk about it later. But it's a great.
I'm not that into self promotion.
Okay, well, we'll work it out. Legs Love, take care of yourself. Thank you for fighting the hard fight. This was a really great hour, even if it was a little depressing. It felt like refreshing to kind of like, I don't know, have a sense of what's happening.
We have to have hope.
I know.
We're alive.
Yeah.
Isn't that what James Baldwin said?
How can we subscribe to your newsletter?
I put the link. Hold on. It's so, y'all, lower your expectations, everybody. But I put the link here.
You're really not into self-promotion. You're like the opposite.
But like, if you subscribe.
We will be back tomorrow. We have no idea who the guest is going to be, at least according to the calendar. Maybe Kate is going to play Where's the Lie. See? She is. If she doesn't, maybe I will. Maybe Scott will.
Yeah.
In any event, that'll be 22 hours and 59 minutes from now. And until then, Kate?
I love you, Legs. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, all the people typing and typing away. I hope your day No, I hope you have it. I hope you find something
Legs,
to be
they're
really
just
excited
in your,
about today.
they're not real. They're just in your computer. They're just like little people inside your
Hiding
computer.
in the computer.
Hiding in the
little,
computer.
Little guys.
Little people.
I can't even tell how you're making fun of me, but that's okay.